don't know. Let's see.
I've got it as loud as it'll go.
Huh. I don't know.
Pat, are you able to hear them?
Very, very faint. I can hardly discern what's being said.
Father, can you hear us?
I can.
I can hear you better, Mrs. Tobias.
I have a big mouth.
She's got a big mouth.
Hey, a Greek. What do you want? You know?
Right.
Where's my? Oh, come here, Daisy.
Jumping on it.
Okay.
She was up here a second ago,
Oh,
and then,
well.
then decided to leave.
Oh, okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Steve.
I know Pat couldn't hear you, but I can hear you just fine.
You can hear Dick too?
Yeah, I think so.
Ah,
Yeah.
that's weird. Okay.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right. Move this to the side here. Perfect. Scroll up back to step 15. We were going to do a little bit more review of that. Make sure that
Well, I gotta go get my.
live streams are going. Okay, good. They
I left my the one before this on top of the computer alcove.
okay.
You could then get that.
Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present all place and filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse of every stain and save our souls, O gracious Lord.
I mean,
Okay, so let's go ahead and start with Pat and Steve for reflections and any commentary on step 15, which we did last week, but was such a major undertaking that we decided to kind of pull it into this week as well as our readings for this week.
Well, I've now read it twice, and I still have a lot of questions and a very limited understanding of, what's going on here.
Okay.
I guess one, message that came through is how we have to be ever vigilant in the quest for chastity, that it can, impure thoughts or whatever can just come upon you even while you're sleeping in the middle of the night when you least expect it. And I think I read even when you're praying.
Right. There's an element here that is specifically for monastics because obviously when you've dedicated your life to chastity, clearly the enemy is going to try to unravel that. But given the proliferation of pornography addiction with people in the world today, to the extent that there was one study that said that teenagers were experiencing erectile dysfunction because they were so addicted to pornography that they couldn't actually be with a woman because they become so. We'll get to kind of the desensitization in a later one of the later steps, but that it has become such a prolific problem, and a lot of it has to do with, in my opinion, it's kind of everywhere. You see it in TV, you see it in advertising, and what makes it even worse is because of our cell phones and computers, it is so easy for people to acquire these things. But let's go to Pat, some of your specific points so that we can try to explain further.
All right, well, I have a few.
Okay.
One that I did understand, I guess, is number 33. On the one hand, I guess, I'm not sure like where this comes from, but they say, or the demon says, that God is merciful and will forgive you your impurity. Yet, on the other hand, Is it after you committed?
After you fall, and then tells you, well, God's a
So
judge,
God is going to
going to
judge you
destroy
for
you.
that. So, but in a way, that's true. I mean, God is merciful, but He's also the judge.
Correct. So what it is the demons are using half truths to try to beguile us. On the one hand, saying, "Oh, God's merciful. He's merciful. He'll overlook it. He'll overlook it. You're only human. It's okay." And then when you've done the sin, and the reality is I was speaking to another person that was watching our class and talked to me after the fact, said that that really could apply to any sin,
That's right.
to any fall that we have, whether it's fornication, is the case of this step, or really anything that we tell ourselves through the demonic presence that, oh, God's merciful, but then after we fall, then the demons try to get a 1-2 on you and say, well, now you're done. Now your goose
Yeah.
is cooked.
And make you feel despair.
Correct. As opposed to understanding that
Yeah.
both elements are still true. God is the righteous judge, and God is merciful. Obviously, we never should have fallen, but that doesn't mean that we cannot be brought back up. So it's it's a very sick game that the evil one plays, because the ultimate goal is for your destruction, not just spiritually, but wanting to kill you ultimately, so that you'll be basically cut off forever.
Yes. I found that some of his more brief reflections were to me the most approachable and the most powerful. Like I liked number 45. The sensual soul shuns solitude, even though it's difficult to say, it's easy to grasp.
It really is, because someone that is fleshly and wants those interactions, they don't want to be alone. They want to be around people.
Right.
So what was one that caused you to have a lack of understanding, though, Pat? Because from the two that you picked, you do have a good grasp.
Well, I'm looking specifically at 14 and 15. I'm not sure I understand the distinction between the first person. Okay, you're fighting your impure urges,
Mm-hmm.
like by keeping busy and hard physical work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then there's another person who tries to fight those urges by trying to be moderate and being vigilant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that's like putting the dog collar. But then the real way to conquer that is through what he says: humility, freedom from irritability. Then you really can kill.
Correct. So in other words, people try to fight this demon in manifold ways, whether it's trying to keep your hands busy because idle hands are the devil's playthings, or trying to seek other pursuits. But ultimately, what really needs to change is the inner man, the things that are actually the problem inside you. So instead of dealing with the symptoms, you need to be dealing with the actual problem inside. And humility, true self-knowledge, and ridding yourself of the other passions is what's going to ultimately help you here.
Well, maybe this is an irrelevant question, but again, in this 14, is one of them better than another? Like, is the weakest form fighting the urge through hardship and perspiration, and then the next best is temperance, or are they both equally futile?
It's it's one of those things where each person is a little different, and each person requires a different hand. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's just it's different tacks of dealing with this.
Okay, and neither in itself is good enough.
Correct. They're good enough, but ultimately they're just masking the symptom is what he's getting.
Yes.
So the problem is still present, even though you are not. It's not giving an opportunity to swell up, but it's almost like trying to push down on a geyser. until you deal with what's underneath, that geyser that's coming up, you're just dealing with the symptoms of it.
Or like a wild animal, he says,
Mhm.
you can tie it to a tree, or you could put a collar and leash on it, but neither one of those is really going to ultimately do the job.
Exactly.
All right, so I guess I did have that one, okay.
And Steve, was there any that you had?
Well, see, I just lost my page, but I'll say in general, I seem to remember, although I'm having trouble finding the particular points now, but there seems to be several places where they basically say you're not going to solve this problem that you have by yourself.
Right.
Correct.
You need to either turn to somebody else, or you really need to turn to God.
Right.
Exactly.
And pray to God on this, because this is such a difficult one, because it's a we all have natural instincts and natural urges. I mean, and it points it out that these are natural urges, but on the other hand, they need to be tamed.
Correct. This is what separates us from the beasts that we are supposed to be able to have. There's another reason why this particular chapter was so mammoth compared to the others that we do in succession after this, because this is such a important element, and it is something that is people have been fighting for years and years and years. And it's one of those things that you have to be vigilant with, and to understand that it is not something that can be done with just willpower alone, but only through divine intervention and with spiritual assistance.
Right. Now, in terms of some particular numbers, I think I had 42 and 43 I thought were interesting. Or is it 43? Let's see. Oh, no, I'm thinking of 43. Okay. Every other sin that a man may commit is outside the body, while he who commits impurity sins against his own body. And this is certainly because the very substance of the flesh is defiled by pollution, which cannot happen in other sins.
Correct. It's another reason why this is one of the worst sins, because it is all against the self. Even though we're not aware of it, it is actually polluting us. It is destroying us. It's essentially the same thing as taking a knife and hurting yourself, as opposed to other sins in which we are committing attacks on other people.
Well, okay, so let's take that example though. If you do, stab yourself, let's say you try to commit suicide, which in itself is a mortal sin, and you fail. Why isn't that also at the same level in terms of defiling the body?
Absolutely. And the thing about it is that is the goal of the evil one, is defile the body, and then, I mean, ultimately, this is one of the reasons why what is the thought that most people have if you're standing on a tall building and you're by a ledge? What thought comes to almost everybody? Jump. Where did that come from? Why do we have that self-destructive impulse when we're on the edge of that ledge?
Because we saw it in a movie.
Well, it's the evil one, because the evil one desire is to cause us to have separation through sin. So when we sin, we've cut ourselves off from God, and especially with sexual sins, because it is the most self-defiling. It is absolutely cutting off and making a separation between you and God. And so the next step is, if I can get you to kill yourself, then that separation becomes permanent. So they are linked in that regard. Death, that kind of death, is the ultimate goal of the enemy. And so it is linked to all of the sins. Because
now in 44, he goes on to say, okay, and I should like to ask, why in the case of every other sin do we usually say that people have slipped, but that when we commit fornication, we say sorrowfully, so and so has fallen.
It's a
So it's
worse
another,
sin.
again, that higher level of
Correct.
sin.
Yeah.
And that's the reality about it is that every other sin, yes, is related to pride. But this sin, by its very nature, is self love. And through self love, you have cut out God, you've cut out everything. So it is literally the antithesis of agape. It is completely all about you. And so, as such, it is a fall, a complete and utter fall, as opposed to, I shouldn't have said that, as opposed to giving into desires and thinking about those things to the fruit of fornication. Keeping in mind that, and we see it in other places in this section, that the thought of hitting you is not sin. That's an assault. The spirit, you're under spiritual assault. It is when we give into those thoughts, when we let them ruminate, we give them kind of a place to stand on us. That is when they become a problem and become sin. So we understand that this is one of the worst possible sins because it is self-destruction and it is the antithesis of the selfless nature of Jesus Christ. No more, we should be looking at this, understand that when someone does fall, it's not to go, oh, now they are corrupt and they're unclean, keep them away from us. All the more we need to pray for them and embrace them to say, oh my gosh, any of us could fall. And that's why we have to be vigilant constantly. Mrs. Tobias, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I had a question. When he keeps talking about fornication, but he's talking about more than sexual sins. I mean, what exactly is he meaning by fornication?
Fornication in this is sexual sins.
Okay.
So giving into your imagination, giving into gratifying yourself or going with someone else. Basically, it's all about you.
More than just sexual congress. It's like thoughts or those kinds of things.
Sexual congress doesn't happen until you've already crossed that barrier. You've already given into the sin with the thought and embraced that conclusion. Once you've gotten to sexual congress, you are already 3 steps in past where now it's actually very, very bad. This is one of the reasons why, and Dr. Ed talked about it last week, that line where it said basically with this sin it pretty much puts you below the starting ground. You don't just hit the floor, you crater when you fall into this sin. So it is one to be very, very aware of, to be very, very on guard against. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any final thoughts before we move on from step 15?
No.
I just had a comment in that when Pat had mentioned one of the numbers, I forgot. It reminded me, like, people who don't understand Catholicism or Orthodoxy for that matter and what confession is, you'd always hear back, when I was growing up, oh, he's Catholic, don't worry, he can go to confession, say 6 Hail Marys, please, slave, do it again. Oh, then you can go back again. Not understanding that's not the way of confession. It doesn't give you a clean slate to go ahead and do the same stuff and then come back for another 6 Hail Marys or something.
Right.
Well, and to an extent, that is exactly what the demons are trying to explain to you, to say, leading up to the sin, they're saying, oh, it's just a little sin, go and confess it, it's fine. It's like, you don't understand the damage you're doing to yourself. It's like saying, have 6 or 7 beers, you'll be fine to drive, it'll be fine by morning. It's like not realizing the peril that you're putting yourself in by doing that, thinking that you'll be okay. So again, the deception, the lie.
Does God distinguish between big sins and little sins? Or are they
Yes and no. That's kind of a loaded question. If we look to the gospel, or excuse me, the universal letter of St. John, there's 2 kinds of sin: mortal sin and not mortal sin.
right?
The distinction between mortal sin and not mortal sin according to John the theologian, is intent.
Yeah.
Basically, as an Orthodox Christian, we view all sin the same. Any sin cuts you away from God. Every sin is dangerous. Every sin is problematic. We do view sexual sin as worse, and why we see it as something cratering, and God does see that too, is because when we do those things, we are setting ourselves directly opposed to God because it is the antithesis. If God is about the other, this is all about the self. So it is the antithesis of God. It's the complete opposite of God. But as far as the way we view sin, we view it as sins that I do on purpose are mortal. If I do something and I know it's wrong, then I have committed mortal sin. If I commit a sin and I was not aware that I was sinning, I sinned unintentionally, you offended somebody but you didn't realize you were offending them, that is not mortal. But mortal sin, the sin that is deadly, is sin that we do knowingly, which means any of it. But this is the most dangerous of those because it has the most harm to do to you, and has the most propensity to make it worse for you, especially when it becomes an addiction. Because it's very, very hard if you're only looking into yourself and your own pleasures to look out to realize what you're doing to yourself. Because all sin, there is no sin that cannot be forgiven, that cannot be, repented of. There is no such thing. But if we don't ask for forgiveness or repentance, then we've sunk our own ship. Which is where we're going to get in, I think it's in step 18 if we get to it today. But let's go ahead and look at step 16 and 17 together, and step 18 and 19 together. Did everyone read those steps?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure why St. John did this, because the previous steps, he kind of combined the sin,
Right.
the virtue, and in one. But in this one, he has separated them into their own entities.
He was trying to get to 30, Father. 30 was a good number.
So let's look at 16 and 17 as an overarching theme for broad thoughts, and then we'll go into specifics on them.
Can I
Yes.
contribute for Patrick?
Yes.
Michael? Now this one he's actually talking about 16 through 18, but we'll see where that goes. It's apparent from the writings of St. John that steps 16 through 18 are directly related to gluttony and the stomach. Step 16 is about worshiping idols in this age. Everything is about money. To worry about money is idol worship, because he who cares nothing about money is truly free. Worshiping God, being free from the love of money, is truly the ability to seek the light of above and no worries about what is on earth. So he's really talking more about 17 there than I think. Because that's 17 is the antithesis of the love of money.
Well,
Okay. And Steve, what are your overarching feelings on this one?
Okay, let's see. Well, I mean, I guess I would agree with Patrick Michael. I mean, it's, it starts with, you could say it starts with gluttony. I mean, a child isn't that much aware of money, but can get really into especially certain kinds of food. And then after a while, it becomes, well, I want, it's not about just food. I want this, and I want toys. I want, I'm collecting something. That person has that. I want that too. And then it becomes abstracted. And money, of course, is an abstraction of material things. So we just want money, and you see it, and it takes to the nth degree when you see people, billionaires who want more and more, just that, 10 houses isn't enough, 20 cars isn't enough. I mean, how many cars can you drive at the same time? you know. So, I mean, you can just see how this explodes. Um, I'm sure at an extent greater than ever before at this time in history.
Pat?
Yes, well, I thought that the one that said it all was point 8. The beginning of the love of money is the pretext of almsgiving, and the end of it is the hatred of the poor. There's just a beautiful kind of irony in that.
You know what's funny about that is that, and this is why I urge people when they're doing charitable giving, vet the companies that you're giving to,
Yeah,
and how many of them, of the dollar that you give, how much of that dollar actually goes
right.
charitable to the charitable giving that you're trying to actually do. It is sickening and scary sometimes just how much of that money is only being given to the executives.
Yeah, to pay their salaries.
It sounds like it's a charitable thing. It's not.
Right.
It's like maybe 2 cents of every dollar is going to the actual help of what you're giving to.
Yeah.
Ed, Dr. Ed.
Yeah, I guess I don't know, nothing incredibly insightful, but just the words of Christ, how you can't serve God and mammon, how money can essentially be an idol. And I think it kind of fits in within the ladder that we're talking about in terms of gluttony, fornication, being a self-idol of sorts, and then he talks about money being an external idol. Yeah.
Can someone explain point 10?
What was that?
Can someone explain point 10?
That was my
A
question.
monk who loves money is a stranger to idleness. In other words, he's going to keep moving. And hourly remembers the words of the apostle, let an idle man not eat, and these hands of mine have ministered to me and to those who are with me. So in other words, using scripture as a pretext to work. I'm working, but why are you working? You're working because you want money, which is a problem for that. So it's another one of those things where one sin is aiding another sin, with the concept of like, I'm fighting this sin. It's kind of when you looked at the one that you showed us, Pat, which was that I was like, oh, I'm collecting money for the poor, and yet when it comes time to give that money to the poor, it's like, well, no, it's mine now. I especially think that these two steps are salient to the people here, because between the prison ministry and the almsgiver ministry of St. Basil, a lot of hard work goes to collecting and distributing for the poor and those who are less fortunate. Dr. Tobias? I can't hear you.
I had the question the same as Pat about number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one was, again, Pat and I think very much alike.
Yeah, I'm honored that you feel that way.
What was your other question, Dr. Tobias?
I think you kind of explained it, but I think I've seen charts of the almsgiving and all, and the different charities that quote unquote charities. Of all of those, I think the Lions Club is 100% of anything given. Nothing is ever kept by the Lions Club.
Okay, that's good to know.
And the next in line was, I think, Salvation Army.
Well, that's, yeah, that I heard.
Uh-huh.
The one that when you're working for the government, they come around and they ask you to give to all these charities. Less than 30% of all that money actually goes to the charities, but the government is forcing you to, because if you didn't give to those charities, your evaluation was written down. I mean, you,
Surreptitiously, I mean.
yeah.
Well, that's what, again, this is one of the reasons why, and for the big shots, like Steve was talking about, people just the love of money, and what really makes it really really frightening is when it is being used in the pretext of helping the poor. Uh, it's very very frightening. Um, but let's go ahead and move into step 17, because I'll be honest, on my end of a question is I had a little bit of different difficulty differentiating step 17 from the previous step of detachment.
Mhm.
So let me hear some of your overarching thoughts on poverty and what it really means to be poor in spirit, looking into the Beatitudes. When it says being poor in spirit, it doesn't just mean being physically poor. It's talking about not desiring anything, to have no attachments to anything.
Well, there's also this idea of, entrusting your care to God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and I think there's a reference to the birds, and there's, I'm terrible at quoting chapter and verse, but I know there's a sermon where they're talking about, well, the birds, they don't plant anything; they just go out and find their food, and there's plenty of food, and that's true of other species, and we're the ones who are worried about where is our food coming from, where is this coming from, where is that coming from, and we don't trust enough in God that He's going to provide for us.
Correct. This is linked to the seek first the kingdom verse when Jesus Christ is saying, think about the birds. They don't have big stores. They don't have big barns, but they're taken care of. Think about the lilies of the field.
Right.
They're more beautiful than anything in Solomon's palace, and they're here one day and gone the next. You don't think God is going to take care of you? Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be taken care of.
Right. That's exactly what I thought, exact thing. I couldn't think of the passage, but I remember the birds. The birds, they have no cares.
If you ever get a chance, I really recommend reading St. John Chrysostom's On Wealth and Poverty, where he breaks down the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And in it, St. John Chrysostom really highlights the difference of what it means to actually be rich and what it actually means to be poor. And kind of like bring it down, although I don't say it anywhere nearly as eloquent as he does, is he says that the truly poor man is the man who is never satisfied with what he has. It is always desiring, always wanting more and more and more. Kind of like Steve was saying about, 20 cars. Why do I need 20 cars? Versus the truly rich man is the man who wants nothing, desires nothing, is satisfied with everything. One of my favorite lines was that's like, everyone is a slave then to the man who wants nothing, because he sees everything as given to him.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. Not expecting it, not asking it, but enjoying it. And that's the thing, is that when our minds are slaves to money and material, we're always looking to the next thing. We're always looking for the next thing to acquire. And that's why, money is a part of it. The love of money is the root of all evil, because it's a gateway drug to other material things.
Father, I was telling my dad that I remember that when I was in junior college, I had to write essays, and one of the essays was money was the root of all evil, but you were supposed to be either pro or con. Well, I went con, and of course he had Bible verses all over the place. I was trying to explain what my thoughts were, that it wasn't money itself, like it's not a gun's fault that they kill somebody, it's the person, but
No.
how you need money for charitable things, you need money for good things, it's how you use the money, your thoughts of it. But he didn't like that. So
Well, it's a misquote
he
when we
didn't
say that money is the root of all
he
evil.
said money, and I don't think money in and of itself is bad. I think you could use money for alms for the poor, and you need to help people with
Good
it.
point.
Correct,
So
and
would
we've
you say
seen
Mrs. Tobias, avarice is the root of all evil?
correct. A better understanding is again that love, that making it an idol. It's an idol worship.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why when Jesus Christ was approached by the young rich man, Jesus Christ said, "If you want to be perfect, sell everything you own and follow me."
Yeah.
This wasn't a blanket statement for everybody. All of you need to sell everything and become monks. Well, that's not what he said. He just knew that that man had made money his idol, and if he was to be saved, he needed to get rid of it. So, what is our idol? What do we need to get rid of?
Father, I think there's another kind of conundrum at this point in time, and I can really speak for our people who are in my standard of living, Pat and my standard of living. We don't have to, let me backtrack that a second. Obviously, there are people who live paycheck to paycheck, and they have to worry about money because what they need, they have to go and buy things and they don't have enough, and they're worried about money. And then you have people who have a lot of money and they're still worried about money and they want more, right? But then you have people, I'm going to say, like, I'll just say for myself, I won't talk for Pat. I'll say that, I don't have to worry about money. I mean, if I'll just give you an example. I mean, I felt really bad about this. I stupidly parked in a place where I could get a boot. And I just was going across the street to do something, and I said, "I'll go in here, and then no one's going to catch me within 5 minutes." Well, I got caught, and I had to pay $170 to get the boot off on the spot because I had somewhere else to go. Eventually, I'd have to pay it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know what? I don't feel that. Some people would really feel that. That would really be, horrible for some people. But for other people, well, okay, I can live without that $170. And so, you can put aside your worry about money and worry about things, but you're using money and you have it there when you need it. So that's a kind of like a conundrum of today's ages, I mean, I guess.
So this kind of again goes back to the element that if you trust, if you have, the desire of God, then things will work themselves out. And this is where again the poor man is the one that is always wanting versus the rich man that doesn't want for anything, and that's regardless of your station. If a rich man is still desiring more and more money, then he's poor in his mindset. And to kind of give an example of this as to where our mind should be in this, St. John of Shanghai was famous for his orphanage. And one of the problems at that orphanage was he kept bringing in orphans. And the nuns that were working there were getting annoyed with him because they didn't have enough materials. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have enough money to take care of all these kids. And they were like, "You're collecting them like stray dogs." And he says, "I've got to take care of them." And this one nun was constantly pestering him. And finally, St. John looked at her and said, "All right, what? What do you need that'll make it okay right now?" It's like, "Well, at the very least, we need food for breakfast for the kids." Fine. So he went upstairs to his chapel, upstairs, and started praying. The next morning, they heard a knock on the door. And the orphanage was in the port in Shanghai. And there was a sailor there with 2 huge barrels And he said, hey, we heard there was an orphanage here. Could you use these barrels of oatmeal? We accidentally ordered too much and we can't put it on the ship. Can you use it? The nun's jaw dropped because it was exactly what she had asked for from St. John. And she said, all right, fine. I'm not going to question you again. God will take care of it. And we see this again and again within stories of faithful communities where they're wondering what is going to happen. How are we going to make it through this? And then it sometimes happens. And we hear this also with so many, faithful people that they just say, you know what? Don't worry, God's going to take care of it. And then somehow a check comes or somebody steps in and says, you know what? I'll take care of it. We have to understand our disposition is probably the most important part. What are we doing with it? How are we behaving? And so it's a question of not the value of the money, because obviously it is different. Both, it's funny, it happened all at once. Nick, Vicky, and I, we all had to change our brakes. And it was an expensive thing. And all of us were going like, oh boy, that's an expensive thing. And you're right, that would be something that for another person that's like, oh my gosh, now we can't do that. The question is, how do you take it? How do you run with that imposition? Do you say, is it something that is going to cripple me? Is it something that I'm just going to say, okay, you know what, it'll work itself out? And so to truly be in poverty, the correct poverty that St. John of the Ladder is talking about, is to have the mindset that it's going to be okay. Somehow we will get through this. And that's one of the reasons why when you go to some of these Christian nations in Africa, are not nations, I should say, but Christian communities, and you see these people that are living in poverty that would make the people that are in our poverty go, wow, that's really, really poverty. And they're happy. They're not worrying. They're not upset. They're happy. They have that mindset of it's okay, and we're okay, and we're grateful for what we have. And you wonder to yourself, why can't I have that mentality? Why can't I have that? And that's why for some people, no matter how rich they get, they're never happy. There are so many people that have said that winning the lottery was the worst thing that ever happened to them in their life. That suddenly they were the most miserable people that could ever be. So money doesn't solve everything. It is a necessary tool. But a priest friend of mine once told me, said, there's nothing cheaper than money. Somehow for those that are in need to do good things, the money somehow comes, that we're able to somehow make it happen to help people. It's a matter of our disposition and a matter of trusting that God will take care of the ministry that we're trying to do.
Well, I'm a living example of that this year. I was so worried, as Steve could tell you, because of the pandemic and we couldn't hold the pancake breakfast. I kept saying to Steve, what's going to happen to our Angel Tree program? What's going to happen to the prison ministry? That's the only fundraiser we do all year. Now we can't do it. Well, people came through, and we had the same successful Angel Tree Christmas that we've had every year up until now. So God did provide, and I needn't have worried, and I shouldn't have worried.
What makes it even more amazing was that at the same time that we were collecting for the Angel Tree, we were also collecting coats for people, for the homeless, and we were also collecting funds for the debt school.
Right.
And all three endeavors were fully funded and able to do what they needed to do.
Right.
It shows us that when we trust, it will be okay. It'll provide.
That was a lesson.
It's our disposition to say, God will take care of it. I just need to work hard and trust.
Yeah.
That's what I told Pat.
Makes the ministry fruitful.
Yes, you did.
What was that, Steve?
I said, that's what I told Pat. I said, it'll work out. I mean, I did. I mean, I wasn't as worried, but in a sense, it's good. It was good for Pat to worry because she talked to a few people and expressed that worry, and they were the right people.
Correct. But here's the thing too, is that sometimes those moments of worry are beneficial. That we could look at that nun in the story of St. John and go, oh, she should have believed. Yeah, but that story of her worry and doubt brought more glory and honor to the prayers of St. John. And more prayers, when we see the doubt of is this going to work out, and see that people are generous, people are giving, it's amazing.
Right.
We just have to trust and work hard.
Well, and then you talk about giving, and there's the other parable where the older woman, she gives her last 2 cents.
That's actually was that in this one where it says that if you think that, oh yes, it was, I love it.
Yeah, yeah.
The kingdom of heaven was bought with 2 mites.
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah, right. Yes, that was great.
So it's not the amount of money that has nothing to do with it. So let's go ahead and go into step 18.
I think Dick was going to make a comment.
Oh, go ahead.
Number 12 expressed everything that y'all just discussed. Unwavering faith cuts off cares.
Yeah,
Number
Right.
12.
Right.
exactly. So let's get from the highs that we just experienced to the depths of utter sadness.
Yeah.
Step 18 was a gut punch. So let's hear some overarching feelings on this step. We'll start with Dr. Ed.
I have to say that I saw myself in this one, especially with everything he said in number 3. It's too long to read here, but everything he says is like, yeah, that's me, that's me, that's me. And it did make me feel a little better when he said in number 5, I am not ashamed to admit my own powerlessness, since I am sorely afflicted by this sickness.
It's exactly right. Yeah.
I will admit, Dr. Ed, I felt the same way. I started bawling.
Mm.
At that, I was like, oh, man. Because that's all of us.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
all of us. And to hear St. John, like you said in verse 5, say, and it's got me too. It's like, oh, thank God. But this is truly one of the most destructive, horrific elements that anyone could ever experience, and we see it everywhere. Dr. Tobias?
I'm like Dr. Ed. It just, that's me.
Yeah.
I mean, you're sitting there, you're praying, and all of a sudden, some other thought comes into your head, and then you kind of snap out of it, think, "Oh my God, why did I do that? Why am I not listening? Why am I?" It just puts you to shame.
Father, how would you define insensibility? I took it as like a deadening of feeling, right?
Correct.
That's
If
in
we
the number 3, which I think we all agree was so powerful, there's almost like a hypocrisy in it, though. He blesses silence, but praises it with a spade of words. He complains
Exactly.
that he's sick, but he goes on eating the foods that are making him sick.
Mhm.
How is that insensitivity?
So insensibility basically means to be mindless. So it's deadening of the soul, which leads to the death of the mind before the death of the body, which means that because we've become dead to ourselves, and this is a very good step because we hear all about the idea of the death of the passions, like almost like the idea is like, well, I should be numb. It's like, no, that is not holy at all. To be numb like this, to basically not have any of this really pierce you, means that you're going through the motions.
Yeah.
Your soul is so dead that you are essentially pretending to have all these things. You voice it and say, "Oh, I should change. I should change." You know, it's like saying, "I really need to diet," as I keep shoveling down donuts. You're cognizant and yet you're not aware. You are basically not in your right mind anymore because you're not feeling, which means to be dead inside. And
Right.
the problem with this and why this is so deadly, because it really reminds me of things like the Marquis de Sade, is the idea of trying to find feeling in external and internal stimulus, whether it's through philosophies. I love that, a brainless philosopher. And we
Yeah.
see that today, like all these people trying to give you their philosophies and their statements on what it is to be human, or to be what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, what it means to be anything. And ultimately you realize that this is just empty. A lot of this is just empty speak that doesn't pierce anything with the human condition and who we are at our core. And so what we see also with sin is that with sin, we become dead to ourselves. And this is one of the reasons why you see with a lot of times with some of the most horrific sins didn't start that way. For example, with serial killers, what's one of the common elements that you hear about serial killers?
Kill animals.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
They have no feeling.
Remorse.
Path. They don't have emotions. They feel dead inside, and it progresses. They start with killing animals, and that somehow elicited a feeling. And so eventually that's not enough. And so they have to go to killing people. And we see this with all kinds of different depravities where, you go from one and then eventually that doesn't give you any pleasure. So that means you've got to do something weirder or stranger. And so you see a bunch of these people that are living very strange lifestyles and doing very strange things, and they're still not happy. Because nothing is fulfilling. Nothing is making them actually feel. Because the further we go into this sinful life, the worse and more dead we become. And what's even worse is that when you become that numb, you're not even aware that you're numb. Someone said to me once that, after the umpteenth tragedy on television, that, what really scares me is that this isn't bothering me the way that it should.
Mm.
That I am not as horrified as I should be because I've become numb to it.
Right. That's
The
true
mass
of violence on TV too. You see so much of it and it's just like nothing.
Yeah. You're not shocked anymore.
Yeah.
Whether it's violence, sexuality, everything, we are becoming dead inside because of it.
Yeah.
And so because of it, with no feeling of it, with no emotional response to it, we have no fear of God. That's why we scoff. That's the idea, is like they scoff when they look at the grave. They scoff when they look at that. For example, when you go to a funeral, instead of, looking at the dead person and saying, "Oh my God, that's going to be me. What is awaiting me at my judgment?" We laugh, we joke, we pretend as if that's not going to be us one day.
Yeah.
Did
Can I
anyone
make a
outside
comment
of
on one
number
of the
three?
points in this step 18 that I thought rang so true was point 4. They hear about death or someone's death and they cry for like 2 seconds and then the next minute they go and sit down to a big meal and they feel nothing. It's, I mean, like a superficiality of feeling, you know, maybe for one tiny second they feel bad, but then they could just brush it aside.
It really is when Jesus Christ was giving his parable of the sower, he talked about the seed that fell and it grew, but because it had no moisture, the second a wind came, it picked it up and tumbled it away like a tumbleweed. And that's kind of what it is. We're like, oh, that's horrible. But then we keep spinning
Right.
because we don't have any roots. We don't have anything grasping us. Outside of number 3, Steve, did you have a number that spoke to you?
Well, you know, this even it's before the number, right? If there is, they talk about the death of the mind before the death of the body. You know, sometimes we talk about how certain people, and I think my mother was kind of like this. You know, she was alert up until almost her last day. But there are, you know, this death of the mind. I mean, besides not feeling, there's also the death of the mind of not thinking.
Right.
And just allowing yourself to be filled up with other people's thoughts, other people's passions. You know, you let somebody else to define who you are, define what you're thinking, define what you're feeling.